I have this habit of bursting into song at unexpected moments. Sometimes it's disconcerting to people around me. Usually I'm able to contain it as humming when I'm out in public or in polite company. But when I'm around people with whom I become comfortable, they'll ask me how I am, and when tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing. It's not that I think I have a great voice, it's just that the world makes more sense to me when it's framed musically. When I had been away from organized religion for a while and I knew I needed more community in my life, one of the things I missed the most was shared music. I missed singing in a congregation. I missed the common language of a hymnal. I missed hearing children learn mythic stories by singing in the children's choir. I wanted to think about big questions like life and death and the divine, and I needed music to do that. So I took the risk of exploring a religious community because of that need for music. And because the Unitarian Universalist congregation that I found was using music and worship, I could stay. Spirituality is an adventure for our whole selves, all of the aspects of our being. We go through our day-to-day lives, solving problems and creating things with words, with actions, with space, with sounds, with emotions. We wrestle with moral and religious questions in every one of these arenas. Art and spirituality depend on each other so that we can engage with moral and religious questions anywhere and anytime we meet them. The arts have helped me engage with religious questions, and I've drawn some conclusions about spirituality based on my experience with different kinds of arts. Spirituality is deeper than words. Spirituality grounds us in relationship, and spirituality moves us towards ethical action. Spirituality and the arts both invite us to dwell more deeply in our minds, our hearts, and our environment. Both spirituality and art can help us to let go of quick answers or surface level noise. They may even help us to become more comfortable with silence or to be open to the still, small voice within. To be clear, I love words. Words are very useful to me. On the other hand, every asset has its shadow side. I am really great at generating words when there is something I would rather not let myself feel. But sometimes even I can't come up with words when I'm overwhelmed by events. Are you a little overwhelmed by events lately? Me too. Art and spirituality can help us to dwell in the place of no easy answers. I used to work for an art museum affiliated with a university. I coordinated educational programs, I managed volunteers, and I talked with teachers about integrating the museum tours and images from our collection into their curriculum. From abstract outdoor sculpture to Renaissance European paintings of saints to carved reliefs of the Buddha from India, our goal was less about conveying information than getting visitors of all ages to engage with the art, bringing their own questions and their own ideas. We wanted visitors to be fully present, to bring their whole selves to the encounter. The curator of education taught us about the work of Philip Yenowin and Abigail Housen. Yenowin and Housen conducted research about how people engaging with visual art make meaning, and how to help people grow in their capacity to engage with art. Based on their work, the docents in their tours and I in our educational brochures posed 3 questions. What's going on here in this image, in this painting, in this sculpture? What's going on here? What do you see that makes you say that? And what more can we find? Visitors were encouraged to trust their own experience of the art and to draw from that experience in a discussion. Information in context is useful at some point, but it does not help anyone to use that information, the movement that the artist is from, what the dates were, who else was influential in their art. Like, that's information and it's useful, but it doesn't help anyone to use that information as a barrier to prevent someone from having their own experience with the art. Does that make sense? That the first thing you do is engage directly with those questions. What's going on here? What do you see that makes you say that? What more can we find? That's what you start with. And then all of that other information about the art can enrich that discussion. but nobody needs that information to start engaging. So the university's collection included outdoor sculpture all over the campus. Some of my favorites were large abstract pieces, and I could approach them and wonder what was going on in that sculpture, and I could pay attention to the experience rather than what I thought someone else wanted me to think about it. I could notice the strong visual lines in one sculpture, having a conversation with the tall trees around it. I could notice the way sunlight and shadows in a courtyard fell on a sculpture, adding to the drama of a piece. And the question, what more can we find, kept my attention on the art for a little longer, helping me to settle into quiet engagement with meaning. Similarly, spirituality invites us to a place that's deeper than words. Sometimes that's serene and blissful, and sometimes it's just sitting with things that are difficult. When we face the most difficult transitions in our lives, sometimes there's nothing we can say, no way to explain or to bargain. These are the times when we need a spirituality beyond words. In her book, Glory Hallelujah, Now Please Pick Up Your Socks, UU writer Jane Ellen Malden talks about such an experience. She writes, "A number of years ago, my brother lay dying in the hospital. He spent days in the intensive care unit while members of my family, including my mother, sat for many long hours on chairs in the hallway outside his room. Among visitors who came to share the vigil was a member of our church. 'How are you doing?' the friend asked. My mother was too exhausted to tell anything but the truth. 'I'm tired,' she said. 'I'm very, very tired. I'm too tired to even pray anymore.' 'But don't you see,' her friend replied, 'your very presence here is a prayer.' There are times when all words fail us. All forms seem hollow, and no one out there or inside seems to be listening. At those times, our presence, just our presence, is a prayer. Our bodies, our actions become our prayer, our connection to God, whatever God may be." So ends the reading. Malden alludes to the reason why it's useful to have worship that uses arts not limited to words. And this is why it's helpful to have an embodied spiritual practice. When we come to a place when the only prayer left is our actions, it's good to have practiced. In these times, when the pace of evil seems designed to overwhelm us, being able to operate in a place that is beyond words gives us another avenue for resilience. Let's be creative with our questions, our doubts, and our silence. Something else that art and spirituality do is to ground us in relationship. The relationship may be with others around us, with history, with other practitioners, with our own souls, or with the ground of our being. Sean Parker Dennison refers to this in the poem about After the Apocalypse, how to survive an apocalypse, right? We still have relationship. In this congregation, we have learned over and over again that our relationships are enhanced through music. We have been learning to sing together again in our recovery from the social distancing phase of the pandemic. And as we learn to sing, we find more joy and a greater sense of community. Choir members and song leaders lift our spirits and find a deeper sense of connection. Creating things with our hands, our bodies, and our voices increases our sense of collective power and helps us to pay attention to each other in the here and now. And this might be what Lewis Latimer was getting at in some of his creative writing. In addition to being an inventor and a scientist, Lewis Latimer also wrote a play that got produced in his lifetime, and he wrote poetry. Here's one of his poems, Love is All. What is there in this world besides our loves to keep us here? Ambition's course is paved with hopes deferred, with doubt and fear. Wealth brings no joy, and brazen-throated fame leaves us at last naught but an empty name. O soul, receive the truth, ere heaven sends thy recall. Naught here deserves our thought but love, for love is all. Latimer suggests that our loves, plural, collectively, form the strongest force that keeps us here. And I can imagine several meanings to where here might be. It is not necessarily a fixed point. Here moves with life and time. Here is where we put one foot in front of the other or one wheel around the other. Here is the present moment, this time and place and this plane of existence. Here we are, gathered in strength, rooted in the world as it is. Love keeps us grounded in relationship in the here and now. In these times, it is our relationships that will sustain us and give us the strength and purpose to go forward. In healthy relationships with each other and with the spirit of life, we will remember our values and we will remember what is true in history, even when warped and cruel misinformation is surrounding us. When we create, when we find the ground of our being in the present moment, when we find beauty together, we can overcome the trauma response that certain elements are trying to evoke as a way of undermining our power. People need each other. For those of us who have marginalized identities, it is essential that we have a place where we show up regularly, where people will miss us and follow up if we disappear. For those of us with relative privilege, it is essential that we pay attention to the people around us and follow up when someone is missing. So right now, look around. Look around if you're in the sanctuary, look around you at who's there. Think about who you're going to follow up with if you don't see them next time. If you're in the Zoom, look around in the Zoom squares. Think about who we're going to follow up with. Investing in relationships through art and spiritual practice is a form of resistance to tyranny. Love is all. A third thing about both spirituality and the arts is that they can move us toward ethical action. The Poor People's Campaign understands this. They have a songbook for their movement, and they have special training for song leaders. The campaign is inclusive of people of many faiths and no faith, and they accomplish this by being multivocal, not by asking people of faith to hide their differences or their spiritual perspectives. Art, music, and spiritual practice help us commit things to memory, to learn them by heart, and to let our hearts, thus instructed, lead us toward right action. Spiritual practice and the arts share this quality of cutting through the illusions of systemic injustice and drawing out the power that we have within. The author Toni Morrison of blessed memory, speaking in 2016 at the Stella Adler Institute of Acting, spoke about the role of the artist. She said, "I want to remind us all that art is dangerous. I want to remind you of the history of artists who have been murdered, slaughtered, imprisoned, chopped up, refused entrance. The history of art, whether it's in music or written or what have you, has always been bloody because dictators and people in office and people who want to control and deceive know exactly the people who will disturb their plans. And those people are artists. They're the ones that tell truth. And that is something that society has got to protect." In our own time and context, book bans and curriculum purges and attacks on libraries are just the beginning of another wave of attacks on the arts. It is important that we support artists with our attention and kindness, that we purchase art and music created by real live artists and not corporate-owned large language models, and that we use our own powers of creation to tell bold truths. Just as engagement with the arts can prepare us to speak truth to power, so can spiritual practice. Yes, it's also true that faith can be co-opted for imperialism, so we need to be accountable to each other and to the people who are most impacted by systemic oppression. That being said, throughout human history, spiritual practice has been one of the resources that strengthened people who were making change toward love and liberation. It is a tool, it is a power. We need to use it wisely. In recent weeks, we have seen the courage of Right Reverend Marianne Buddy, who drew directly from sacred text to urge the administration to practice mercy. And for this, critics called her all kinds of names, and one legislator even suggested that she should be deported. The unelected shadow president openly accused Church World Service and various Lutheran aid organizations of criminality. Even the vice president, who calls himself a Catholic, characterized the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops as helping refugees in order to pad their bottom line, and implied that helping refugees was illegal. Just like art, spirituality, when practiced with integrity and compassion, is dangerous to tyranny. If we are going to choose the path of integrity and compassion, which we are, if we are going to put love at the center of our Unitarian Universalist faith, which we are, if we are going to risk speaking the truth, which we are, we need practices that will keep us connected to our paths and to each other. We need ways of committing our values to mind and heart. We need to invoke the memory of our ancestors, and we need to commit to being the kind of ancestor that the people who come after us can be proud of. Practices of art and spirituality will give us courage. Practices that help us to sustain ethical action come in a lot of different forms. Embodied or interactive practices have a lot to recommend them. Your practice might be hiking or baking or crocheting blankets. Whatever it is, if it helps you connect with that which is larger than yourself and to tap into your human power to thrive and make change, go for it. Your practice might be meditation or prayer or dance or chanting, something that reminds you of sacred text or spiritual lineage or your deepest values. Let's lean into our practices to help us to speak the truth, to do justice, and to love kindness. In the end, artistic practices and spiritual practices have a lot in common. Both can lead us to a place deeper than words, a place where we can sit with lamentation and pain and growth, a place for our doubts and our questions, a place where silence can make room for what yet hasn't emerged. Both art and spirituality can ground us in relationship as we create and engage together, as we connect with the transcendent and with the deepest truths that we hold within. Both art and spirituality can move us to ethical action, giving us inspiration and courage to be our whole authentic selves, even in times such as this. May you find and sustain practices that are deep, connecting, and encouraging. May creativity nourish your path. May we align with the love at our center and with the spirit of life in our habits of the heart. So be it. Blessed be. Amen.